Hello, scholars. This is Mr. Myers doing lesson 4.4 on political parties. As always, take good structured notes over our objectives. Today we'll talk about the definition and roles and activities of political parties, a little bit about their membership, and then a little bit about the different party systems that exist both in and outside of the United States. Okay, so let's start by talking a little bit about political parties. Our definition of political party is an association of people with common ideas that are seeking to control government. Now, the way that that definition is framed, it might sound a little bit sinister or negative, but it's actually not. It's a way for people to connect to their government, to help hold their government accountable to the needs and the desires and the wishes of the citizenry, and to make sure that policy positions that people want enacted can actually get enacted. In terms of purposes and activities, one of the most basic ones is to recruit candidates to run for office. Democratic Party operatives and Republican Party operatives are always looking for people who could be successful in the primary and the general election. So sometimes they go to individuals and say, hey, we think you should run for office. They also nominate and support candidates. That support can be lots of different things. Sometimes it's financial support that comes from like the RNC, the Republican National Committee, or the DNC. They also educate voters. That's a really important thing that political parties do. They have speeches. They provide mailings. They will have platform positions that are formally adopted at the Republican nominating convention and the Democratic nominating convention. Policy platforms deal with the actual specific things that the party says it's going to try to do or enact if they are elected into office. And then they also organize and control government from the top all the way down to the bottom. And in fact, some of the most important government operatives are those that are in the bureaucracy, and those are the people that actually make the machinery of government run. Now, in terms of membership, there aren't dues that are collected by either party, and in terms of party membership, pretty much all you have to do is say I'm a Republican or I'm a Democrat, and voila, you're a part of a party, you're a member. So membership is really loose in the United States. There are some specific influential factors that might help to determine whether someone would lean Democratic or lean Republican, although again, these are generalizations and don't always hold true. Generally speaking, the more conservative you are, the more likely you are to vote Republican, the more liberal, the more Democratic. It didn't always used to be that way, but it's certainly that way today. In terms of gender, women tend to skew towards Democrats. In terms of race and ethnicity, non-whites, people of color, immigrants tend to lean more towards Democrats than Republicans. Marital status leans towards Republicans. If you're married, you're more likely to be affiliated with the Republicans. Age, the older you are more likely to identify with Republicans. The younger you are, the more likely you are to identify with Democrats. In terms of education levels, increasingly the Democratic Party is the party of the college educated. Income, the higher your income level, the more money you make, the more likely you are to identify with Republicans. In terms of religion, there's a little bit of a split. In terms of evangelical Christians, which are, probably one of the larger groups in the United States, they tend to definitely skew Republican, but there are Jews and Hindus and other groups that would lean Democratic. And you also have to realize that there's some regional demographic differences as well. In the South, it used to be solidly blue, now it's solidly red, so there's a Republican stronghold in the South. In rural areas, Republicans do better, Democrats do better in urban areas, and on the East and West coasts. Now let's move on to party systems, and what we're referring to here is how many political parties are operating in a given system. So there are some systems that have one-party systems, and those generally tend to be dictatorships, right? China, only has the Chinese Communist Party as an option. Now, that tends to provide lots of stability, but not a whole lot of personal freedoms. There are lots of different two-party systems. The United States, Australia, New Zealand would be examples of those. They create stability as well. They're less chaotic than the multi-party systems, and help to lead towards moderation because the two sides have to compromise in order to be able to kind of get anything done. So this is less likely to produce very radical outcomes because the two parties ultimately have to come to some kind of agreement. And then we have multi-party systems that exist, and a lot of good examples of those are in Europe. France and Italy would be good examples of those, England. And these multi-party systems tend to be more unstable, and that's because of the nature of the way that they govern. In order to get a majority, this means that the various parties have to come together and form what's known as a coalition. So the Green Party might have to combine with the Labor Party, which might have to combine with the Workers' Party or whatever the case might be, in order to get above 50% threshold in order to be able to govern. That leads towards compromise and the adoption of those different political parties' policies into that coalition, but those are also inherently unstable. If one of those groups decides to leave the governing party, then there's no majority and the system has to kind of start over again, new elections happen. Multi-party systems tend to have more frequent elections, more instability, more kind of rotation of leaders, but they also require the coalition building that's important for getting things done. Now let's talk a little bit more specifically about our two-party system. So historically, we didn't have political parties in the United States. The Founding Fathers warned against faction, against political parties, but by the 1790s, the parties had kind of coalesced into two, the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans. And for all of our history, except for a very short time in the 1810s and 1820s, we've had a robust two-party system in operation in the United States. Now, in terms of our electoral system, in order to become president, one needs a majority of the Electoral College votes in order to win. And this means that they are likely to have a majority of the support of the American people. By definition, they have to get over 50% of those electoral votes. One other thing to note about our electoral system is that we only have one representative per district, but there are other systems that exist around the world where, let's say, the top 3 vote getters might all represent one particular district. That's not the way that we operate. We also have election laws in place that, even though it wasn't the intent of the laws to maintain a two-party system, it has the effect of doing so. For example, if you aren't a Democrat or a Republican and you want to run on the ballot for election, you might have to get a certain number of signatures in order to even be placed on the ballot. So again, those have the effect of eliminating third-party candidates that don't have a lot of support. So it is true that in Congress we do have a few people who are registered to a party other than the Democrats or Republicans, and certainly we have a few independents. But for the most part, people identify as Democrats or Republicans in the United States. We haven't had any third-party candidate ever win the presidency. We've had some major third-party candidates that have impacted elections. The two you see on the right here would be the two in recent memory that had the closest chance of winning an election. Ross Perot in 1992 was a businessman who ran as a third-party candidate, and he got over 20% of the popular vote. In fact, it was significant enough, it sucked enough votes away from George H.W. Bush that Bill Clinton, the Democratic candidate, ultimately won that presidency. The other one you see there, by the way, is George Wallace. He broke away from the Democrats in 1968 in what became known as the Dixiecrat Revolt, and he ran as a separate segregationist candidate, and he actually did win some electoral votes. Generally speaking, third-party candidates are based off of personality or some kind of very specific issue. They tend to splinter off of a major party and therefore siphon or suck votes away from that party, which is why Democrats and Republicans are always worried about a third-party candidate that might potentially siphon off support. Okay, I hope you took good notes, and please bring any questions to class.